Welcome to Season 2 of The Reflection. We started this series in March 2020 after the announcement of the lockdown and COVID-19 began to change the world.
For 20 weeks, academics, activists and journalists joined us to discuss everything from the UK government's mishandling of the pandemic, the growth of conspiracies, Black Lives Matter, and what it was like to bear witness to the growth of existing local and global inequalities.
For this season, our guests will be reflecting on the political climate of the past year, and we'll be talking to authors who have released books in 2020 concerning matters of race and class.
Welcome to another episode of Surviving Society's Reflection series. We've been recording throughout the summer with previous guests that have already been on the show to talk about what it was like for them, both writing, talking, knowledge production during the global pandemic, Black Lives Matter uprisings. Today, we're really excited to be joined by our friend and multiple Surviving Society alumni, Aurelien Mondon, who is Senior Lecturer in Criminology at the University of East London. If you don't know, get to know, but Aurelien is also co-editor of Reflexivity in Criminological Research, Historical Perspectives on Organised Crime and Terrorism, and Research in the Far Right, and co-author with Aurelien Mondon of Reactionary Democracy. He is co-editor of Identities. Big up that. It's a new one, isn't it? And the Manchester University Press series editor of Racism, Resistance and Social Change. Aaron, I'm so glad I got to read all that out.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. But Aaron's a legend and he's one of these people that don't big himself up. So we get to just big you up now. So hello, Aaron.
Hi, thank you.
Aaron, so last time you were on the show, it was with your right-hand man, Aurelien Mondon.
Yep.
Aurelien's not here today, but Aurelien is going to be on a later show. We are going to return to some of the conversations we had when we recorded in December 2019.
Was it December 2019?
Yeah.
Wow.
Book hadn't come out yet. We had read snippets from the book, but the book came out. We did the launch with you in April. Was it April 20? It was April 2020. What was it like publishing during the pandemic? And I mean, we're going to get you to reintroduce the listeners what Reactionary Democracy is about. But given everything that you had written about and the themes within the book, and then entering this period where we've seen, we saw Donald Trump lose the election, but then we've been in a global pandemic, widening inequalities, further mainstreaming of the far right.
But what I would say at the end of all that is how everyone's become reactionary.
Yeah. So what's this all been like?
I thought of so many ways of articulating that. It's been quite surreal.
Yeah.
It's felt a bit, I guess, sort of slow motion car crash of the world. So many things have happened that I think relate to issues and arguments and analysis that we had in the book, but also new things have developed and new ways which forms of racism and racism denial have given us many more things to think about that we want to say. But it was very difficult because actually I think I felt really honored and glad to be part of a dialogue about such serious issues, to contribute, if we can, to understanding and navigating these multiple crises. At the same time, it was very odd to have it released as we're all dealing with so much and wanting to celebrate the book and wanting to launch it. And I think, as you know, there was a number of launch events online. Me and my co-author have not seen each other in person since prior to COVID. And we haven't had a chance to really talk to people in person a lot, which is, I guess, an interesting thing because in a way we had a much more global opportunities and audience online, but these are time limited. They don't have discussions that flow to dinner and drinks or whatnot afterwards. As I was kind of pointing to is more things have developed. And these are more things that we want to speak to. I think some of the events have set the stage for that, particularly the loss of Trump and the election of Biden as a radical new beginning for the left.
Laugh out loud.
Yeah, it's depressing.
It is.
It's so depressing.
If you had to pick kind of like 2 to 3 or even one of the themes or arguments with the book that you feel like that need to be developed or that are very much speaking to these multiple crises, what would those be? I
think, to start at the sort of beginning of the book, the relation between illiberal and liberal racism, and something we've discussed at length before, when we set it up, we always argued that there was a blurring of the lines. So liberalism and related to democracy can become a guise for and a sort of legitimizing kind of platform for racism and reactionary ideas. But in a sense, when we ended the book, there was a increased bleeding of the boundaries between these. And I think that was significant, not because it destroys the distinction, but because it shows the way in which the liberal racism can feed into or can lead to, I guess, mainstream racism and embolden both the far right and, I guess, just mainstream racists, if you will, to become more emboldened. With COVID, we saw, I guess, quite explicit sort of eugenics arguments. You saw increasingly fascistic kind of responses, both ideological and in terms of policy and practice, such as policing. And we saw this with the Sarah Everard case. We saw an increased, we see this in the US with policing, with racist policing, and the January 6th attack, insurrection, what you want to call it. And in some ways, I think people have made the argument, and we've seen this again and again, going, well, actually, this reveals that it was all about fascism all along. And I think that we were making an argument that it wasn't always about fascism. And then you get into these debates about what is fascism, and it can be quite a deep hole. But where we see the intersection of liberalism and state authoritarianism that is often racist or supports racist ideas without admitting that it is racist. And you see this, for example, with the sort of the HE free speech.
Confirm the acronym there for listeners. Aaron, higher education.
Oh, higher education. Sorry about that.
Yeah, higher education.
And the way in which we've had, you can have a fascistic siege on the Capitol. You can have police crackdowns on protesters, but you can still have the same governments or the same leaders talking about cancel culture and the need for liberty, freedom to speak. It's liberty and freedom for reactionary ideas and for reactionaries. And you see something similar with the anti-lockdown protests. And the way in which far-right conspiracy theories, far-right notions, and reactionary notions of freedom, liberty, and repression are still kind of filtering out, still existing. And so you see this complete coexistence between the two, liberal and illiberal, in a way I don't think I imagined would be that explicit.
There's a few articles I've read that talk about this shift from a neoliberal kind of ideology to an authoritarian capitalist system. Mm-hmm. And
I would say, just to say to you, that's we've been taught, this has been a theme on the series so far. Yeah.
And so and like I said, they kind of sit next to each other. So liberal elements are still held as window dressing. So it's like the hook to get people in. So Boris Johnson and all the others will talk about freedom of the press and woke culture, etc. But that's just window dressing to keep the people calm.
On that point as well, T, like when Aaron was explaining like the illiberal and liberal racism, like he was a few years ago to us with Aurelien, I think that really was a big turning point for us in how we spoke about racism on the show, because through our lived experiences, we witness within our everyday lives and had witnessed a lot of illiberal racisms. And sometimes it makes it hard to see the liberal racisms as just as bad, if not as threatening.
Off the back of that conversation, I understood it like it's the illiberal ones I could deal with, because I understood it. The liberal ones, it's the ones they're the ones that hurt because you didn't really see it.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, actually, like you're fucking racist. Do you know what I mean? But then, as you say, like towards the end of the book, you say that like these actually spill out into each other.
Yeah.
But then, I'm actually I was sat here sort of gobsmacked as you were speaking then. The way you've just spoke about the merging of illiberal and liberal racisms, but also how fascism is like another element to that is very normalised now in our pandemic times. Like to both govern, govern policy, but media.
It's the idea of also being locked down, this pandemic. Like everyone wants to, they want to be by themselves. And the World Health Organization predicted this. They said that with the lockdowns will come, people will start looking inwards and it will become the global fortress and these ideologies will come back.
That's really interesting because, in fact, what you had a thesis that was out there that actually it was all these young men by themselves in their bedrooms that Jordan Peterson and others were speaking to. I think one of the things is that we made the argument that that liberalism and liberal racism enabled a kind of mainstreaming and increasing acceptance of certain forms of racism. Mm-hmm. Now, in a sense, it's offset against the illiberal, extremist, etc., but it also emboldened those more illiberal, extreme racists and racist organizations. At the same time, that doesn't mean that the liberal goes away. Mm-hmm. That actually they don't merge absolutely. You can still see this operation where they can coexist. I mean, you can see the way in which, for example, and it's something I've been thinking a lot about Biden's statement and the media's response post January 6th. Mm-hmm. And the way it's like, this is not America. This is a fringe. This is this. And, this is so exceptional.
So just for the listeners, Aaron, so in the speech, Biden was referring to the Trump presidency.
No, he was referring specifically to the January 6th insurrection, which he called.
Fine.
Yeah. Sorry, I should contextualize. But he was obviously implicating Trump. But by implicating Trump, you're showing this is not so exceptional. And in fact, are you making an argument that Trump is so exceptional? But then if you look at the history of America, and I don't just mean the fact that you have a far right in its history. You have far right insurrectionists. You have fascists marching on Washington in the 1920s. You have Jim Crow as the law of part of the land. It seems strange to say this type of racist or racialized violence is somehow unique in American history. And then you can take that even further. You can say the entire foundation of America is like colonial white settler genocide and slavery. Mm-hmm. So what is so exceptional about this kind of fascist clown show? Mm-hmm. I mean, and not to say that it wasn't dangerous and horrible, but the idea that reactionaries and extremists are taking over the levers of power. Well, it may just be that in the previous era, they were just the senators and congressmen who oversaw these laws, oversaw Chinese Exclusion Act and these kind of things. At the same time, you had, and for a bit of continuity, you had Trump overseeing the Muslim ban, the separation of parents and children at the border. The idea that somehow what happened at the Capitol was somehow this fringe element. I mean, let's say it was a fringe element, but it trades on a history that may actually be far worse. Mm-hmm. But that at the same time, this is the threat. Well, the threat has been elected time and time again. The threat is the mainstreaming of these ideas in the media. That's the threat. And the idea that you can get rid of them by legislating against domestic terrorism, which is not actually a federal crime, mm-hmm. Which is the crime is actually like, international terrorism, which is always not nationalist and white supremacist, mm-hmm. obviously. And they've got a new national strategy that's supposed to deal with this. But at the same time, it increases the security state, which we know has been set up to target Muslims mm-hmm. and has been over the past number of years targeting Antifa, Black Lives Matters, that whole category, so-called Black identity extremists. So how is this new strategy and this emboldening and increasing of the security state and law enforcement going to solve the problem of racism or extremism, particularly if it's not treating racism as the problem? And not just racism, but white privilege as well, because as we know, and this is linked to the issue of criminalization, are we going to trust the police who policed the January 6th attack in that radically different way to the way they policed Black Lives Matter protests?
how do you argue against yourself effectively? Because there are elements to it, right? So close to home, when we had at the end of the football and you have all those riots and there's no police. Yeah. The police are nowhere to be seen. But at Sarah Everard Vigil, the police are heavy-handed. They're in presence. They're in numbers.
Yep.
And I don't really like using the term anymore, whiteness. It's so amorphous. It's so large and complex and nuanced. How do you separate in a meaningful, scientific way to make sense of this? The illiberal racism bleeds into liberal racism, and they're relational too. Sometimes they're separate.
I hear what you're saying, T. Like, you want to find a category, and when Aaron was talking, then I'm like, okay, the way some people would make sense of what Aaron's saying is they would say it's about capitalism. It seems too.
That's not. I think it's not adequate enough. Man.
It's not adequate enough, is it? Because do you see what I mean? So I'm thinking about I'm also thinking about racism. I feel like on this podcast we're possibly a little bit more sympathetic to like Satnam's arguments about racisms and like the racialized outsider, that type of thing. But equally, I do get how you're talking about the State Department and who they're targeting, like how the increase in surveillance targets marginalised people that are just trying to make life better for people on the margins. But like, how can we find a way to understand this that is fluid, but also deals with these labels? So deals with whiteness, deals with capitalism, deals with racisms. I guess I'm kind of critiquing our disciplines to an extent, because some people will just say the simple argument, or not the simple argument, it's very complex and sophisticated and brilliant work on this stuff, will say like, well, it's about racial capitalism, like this is what it's about. But it seems like so much more than that when you see how much many of these things are multiple crises, as you say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And also the way people experience them isn't in relation.
Exactly, yeah.
Isn't necessarily into relation to capital. I mean,
yeah.
You experience it in so many multiple ways. I mean, it's interesting, and I'm very sympathetic to Satnam's arguments,
of course,
as you know.
Yeah.
One example of the sort of liberal and illiberal, it's not just the state being brutal. Sometimes the state can be authoritarian in the name of liberalism, right? So we see this with the higher education free speech bill. We see this also in the case of France with the increased restrictions, bans on religious symbols which target Muslim women. You see this kind of state authoritarianism that actually it affects women at the beach. It affects young women going to school. It also affects people in their places of employment, and is another form, like the recent European Court of Justice ruling about employers having the right to ban these symbols, again, which disproportionately targets Muslim women. And you see something similar in Quebec, in Canada. I always want to get some Canada in there, because I don't often. It's weird. People have remarked on that. It makes me think that you can make an argument about capitalism if you enter it through the point of almost this kind of this deregulation or this opening up of the rights of employers. Now, the rights of employers are now synced with the rights of the state to do this. And the state, let's be honest, keeps on giving itself more rights. But it doesn't have to be reducible to that. So I guess my question would be, and I was thinking about this when the ruling was being discussed, is that, does that mean are the sort of reactionary bros that are always writing about kind of like the people have a right to be racist, the people have a right to have opinions about, enough stuff with immigration. Are they getting a 2-for they get the racism and the employer's rights? Or were these always the same thing for them? And I think it depends. It depends who you're speaking about. I may reduce things like my focus is on racism. My focus is on the relationship between, right-wing discourses, narratives, policies, practices, and racism. I mean, the right is obviously race and racism serve a function for the type of state they want, often, and the type of capitalism they want, or the type of economic system they want. So these are never far apart. But I think that sometimes, and I remember having this argument like way back when I was a PhD student about like, am I going to tell the story of the changing faces of racism, or am I going to tell the story of the changing faces of capitalism? Well, these intersect inevitably, but the story I'm telling is focused on the racism, even when it is a bunch of bros talking on online or and look, I'm fascinated by reactionary entrepreneurship. Like there's no doubt that these people are making a bundle out of this. It's a particular business model, and their aim may actually be the deregulation of the economy and free market. I mean, their libertarianism. So the liberalism may sometimes be libertarianism. But at the same time, they also want to be racist.
Yeah.
This has been one of the, George and Chantal, we joke about this, like maybe we should go right wing just to make money, because it seems to be
that's never going to happen. By the way,
repeat that?
Yeah, George always says if we had a right wing podcast, one episode would make millions of pounds.
Yeah, because we're looking at like Candace Owens. There's so much money involved. Because the question we were asking is, do these people believe in what they're saying, or is it just a grift?
And I think that's partly what I was pointing to at the end, which is that they yes, they're capitalists, but they also want to be racist. They're, and look, I always think of this when I sort of when you're thinking about, is this just an act, right? So there's that old idea going like, I said all these horrible racist things. I was drunk. Like, you pull that from a repertoire. You have a reserve. You have ideas. You know what to say. Like, it's weird that you can be so drunk that you don't realize you're being racist, but your articulation of particular racist discourses, I think, is so it's perfect.
The amount of middle class white men that have had to apologise to me for being racist when they're drunk. Like, it's actually insane. Like, and I look back on it and I wish I'd come back with much more kind of like
snappy
like one-liners, like, oh, like the reservoir. Oh no, you just pulled it from your reservoir. But no. You're right. Like we have to understand that this is something that people do invest in, like within how they think.
Absolutely, but at the same time, right? So let's put the reservoir argument aside. You have to be comfortable enough to say racist things that will hurt people, that will motivate other people to hurt people, and will hurt those people at the sharp end of it when you speak it. That's racist. Doesn't matter if you think, I'm just doing it for the money. I mean, you're doing it. You think it's acceptable. To think it's acceptable, you have to slightly dehumanize the people on the receiving end.
You know what, Aaron, I'm so glad you said this, because I feel like listeners have heard me over the past few years and whatever, always trying to rationalize in my head, why do they do this even though they know that this is going to or could cause harm to one person, lots of people. Do you know what I mean? It is about it. I think a lot of it is to do with money, but it is also what Aaron says, it's dehumanizing. So it's right, actually, these people aren't human enough. Mm-hmm. So that means that I'm going to say this shit on whatever YouTube channel it is about them that's going to get so many views. It is that kind of decision that you make. It is that this person is of less value, so I will say this thing, even though I know that it motivates other people to do harmful things.
Well, this is what
the liberals motivate the illiberals to do harmful things.
It's like those right-wing pundits, Jesse Lee Patterson and stuff like that. Fellow black guys or black people that say clearly racist stuff, and it's very harmful. And you're trying to think through what motivates you, knowing, given that you're black yourself, that you probably experienced this yourself. What motivates you to say these things not once, but on a regular basis? We'll
go back to the sewer report.
Yeah.
What motivates this collection of black people and people of colour to say this shit that is completely, just shits on, so many years of activism, of scholarship? What is that?
I mean,
sorry. No, it's a big one. It's a big one. But honestly, we sit
Tell
there
me the answer now.
Honestly, Aaron, the listeners will know. We sit there every day and we're like, why?
Yeah.
But I guess if I just take a step back to come back to it.
Step back. Always step back.
Because the relationship between racism and economics, right?
Fine.
I'm going to come back to that, but it's a sort of roundabout way because I think it's illustrative. The argument that it is, and we talk about this in the book, about the construction of the white working class as both as the voice of the people, democracy, but always for reactionary racist ideas, is a classist idea. It's part of a divide and rule process that is racist, that serves capital. It does not serve working class people. And not just because it treats the working class as only white. It doesn't address class inequality, even though to those people who they see as working class or even only white. But the fact that, or for example, all the racism on the back of austerity it's a distraction from inequality, from structural inequality, from elite policies and practices which entrench and further entrench inequality. The fact that the fact that they can throw that racism out and they can sacrifice people to it in different ways to it, again, sort of might point to something in the way they conceive of the right conceives of people voting against their own interests. So if they're treating let's talk about this construction of the white working class. If they're treating this group as working class, as victims of capitalist inequality, but they don't care anything about that inequality, and they advocate further entrenched capitalism that will further, or the capitalism that will entrench that inequality, then what do they think these people's interests are? Well, they're trying to make it about whiteness. Mm-hmm. So wouldn't it be possible that on the right, the people who you're talking about can also subdivide their own interests, mm-hmm. or have interests which are contradictory? Mm-hmm. I mean, I struggle with it myself because, and I think this is probably not the time to discuss it, but like the way in which sort of I see sort of fellow Jewish sort of talking heads. I mean, we spoke about one earlier, reactionaries who can treat someone who intermarries or who is anti-Zionist as walking us all towards a second Holocaust, but sees no problem being in bed with people who actually deny the Holocaust because it's free speech, or white supremacists who support not Israel necessarily, but all Jews going there. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I mean that's the whole thing to unpack. I mean, people do vote or support or express ideas that are against their interests, but I think the right is very much in tune with that, and you can have people who that's their business model. Mm-hmm. But their business model also comes from, or career model. Why would the right think that employment, success, and status and money is against their better interest? Well, you can sacrifice yourself and your whole community, or your family's history for it. Mm-hmm. And so if they think the white working class, I'm air quotes, will do that, why wouldn't they do it themselves? Maybe they really believe whiteness is what's at stake. Mm-hmm. I mean, probably do. Mm-hmm. And that makes it more than a business model. That makes it just like, that makes it racism.
I don't know.
It's so powerful.
It's powerful.
It's such. Honestly, like Aaron, you must just sit. You just must sit at home, like just crafting this in your head, like. It's just so, it's clear to me now, hearing that there's multiple things can exist at once, mm-hmm. and that if you're on the right, and if you are a quote unquote traditionally marginalised person on the right, aka a black Tory, then you can have multiple, not just allegiances, but contradictory ideas about society. And I guess getting our head around that is what is always really difficult. But I think Aaron's analysis there is really just sharp.
When we, as academics, what we tend to always leave out is the emotion side. So empathy comes into it. So if you can run these calculations, what happens to the human sides of empathy, understanding, and where do these go? Because, as a human being...
But this is what we've been coming to terms with since the election, 2019. We have been coming to terms with the end of that effectively. But also what Aaron just said, it's about racisms. So we had the conversation with Dan after the election. He was like, the thing is, we can chop and change around all these different things of why this happened, why did Corbyn lose, etc. But ultimately, we don't want to stand by a ideology or a narrative that says Fatima shouldn't get the NHS because this quote unquote white English person isn't get. Do you know what I mean? Shouldn't get it, even though the white English person. So it's not for all of us. Yeah. And what are those dividing lines? And possibly like racism.
It can also change. I mean, we saw this with the Euros. We saw this with the way in which a sort of hyper-masculine over-identification would lead people to support a team that with so many black players that they would then turn on so viciously. And I mean, we all know the history of the sort of the use value of
black sportsmen,
and musicians. I mean, we saw this with London 2012. The way in which, and I come back to this because I worked on this years ago. The way in which it was sold as simultaneously multicultural, diverse East London and an antidote to 7/7 and and then later on the riots or the response to sort of what they called riots. And then you can have, I don't know if you've seen this, but the writings of sort of Boris Johnson on Mo Farah.
No.
It is unbelievable.
Say.
It's like, you go into his house and he cooks up an English breakfast like the best of them and bangers and mash. And this is like, it was unbelievable. I was waiting for him to say, and then a bulldog with a flag came out of his bedroom. Like it was the most bizarre thing. And so, they can gloss over anything if it supports something they identify closely with, which is often the nation.
However, just coming back to your point, slightly contradicting that, your point about serving white working class interests.
Yeah.
So a load of white kids, black kids, brown kids and whatever were hungry last year. So Marcus Rashford twice managed to sort that out to an extent. A lot of the people that sort of peddle the white working class left behind shit told him to stop being political.
Absolutely.
So how, do you know what I mean? Like, how do we... So you said, I gave the example of the 2019 election, then you said it changes, think about the football. But then I'm like coming back to the point of Marcus Rashford, like, actually, is that just still consistent?
Well, no, but that's because I think there are certain decisions or calculations made and what matters at different times. What if I can win, I can ignore this, but I'm also waiting for them to screw up.
Fine.
Or I mean that in their kind of words, but I think the idea is that the over-identification with the nation means that this team is representing us. So to support the team is also linked to that.
Nation,
and there's also
but how is not feeding our kids linked to the it's not nationalist.
Well, is
it too empathetic? Is it too compassionate, as Tissot was saying?
But I think that's partly what I was thinking of is the idea of what do you care about? And the reason I mentioned that, sorry, there was a bit of a diversion, but what I was thinking about is when I hear emotion used, and I think this is in political analysis and often sociological analysis in the fields I work in, it's to excuse something. Well, of course they're angry. Of course, and it's often legitimizing. So it becomes this kind of the suture or the kind of the glue that binds and justifies and fills in the cracks of basically ideological
I get what you're saying.
Stuff.
And what's interesting about, Tissot was using it to say, but we're talking about, in my example, we're talking about migrants, and we're talking about people that have lived here for a long time, like the idea of sharing a health service with them, you don't want to share it with them. You'd rather it's privatized. That's kind of one of the like very kind of basic analysis that I have from the election. And he's saying, was that it's the end of compassion, it's the end of emotion?
Well, that's really, really important, because actually, if you think about why don't they care about these kids? Well, they didn't care about those kids when they chose racist nationalism and Euroscepticism over at the very least, critiquing the Tories' austerity policy. And if you remember, and this I think this is something that kind of, your wording triggered this in my head, is that austerity followed compassion conservatism. That basically what had done is originally the idea under Cameron was a shrinking of the state and offsetting it to churches, charities, I don't know, athletes who want to raise money. Do you know what I mean? And I'm not making that connection literally. No. But actually, at a certain point when the economic crisis hit, it was like anything goes. Cut. And if people are still willing to vote Tory, when their communities, their livelihoods, their children and their friends' children's and parents and ill relatives and friends could be sacrificed in such a way, why would they care? That's why they have to hate this, in a sense. Now, then it becomes, and I think almost in principle, because I mean, look, they're voting for the end of the NHS, effectively. So why someone being political, I love this. I mean, like,
I know when everyone says, "Oh, you're making it political,"
because sports in the name of nation has famously apolitical.
I said that to someone the other day. It's dumb. Go on.
I mean, it's just like there was all this.
Read a book. Read a book.
I don't. No. I mean, even I don't know. Wave a flag. No, just wave a flag and evoke the war, because that's totally apolitical.
It's not political, yeah.
Yeah, it's not. It's just one side of. It's the same thing as a free speech debate.
Yeah,
it's the saying. I mean, and these occur because you've naturalized and neutralized right-wing, reactionary, patriotic ideas. It's the same reason why Captain Tom is a hero and Rashford's a problem.
That's a mic drop for Aaron there.
Killer.
Again, like every time we speak to you, Aaron, it really does, it almost feels therapeutic to kind of make sense of how things are and where the contradictions come from. Because I think it is the contradictions that we just find so jarring. And like, just be consistent. Tell us who you are. Like,
this is what I've kind of noticed with this new phase we're in, if you would call it that, where it's context driven almost. So just as, like I was saying to you earlier, as I was traveling through London on the night of the final of the football, during the day, everyone was my friend, but in the evening, people wanted to kill me. Nothing had. So it's the fact that it was all kind of context driven. They were willing to forego the racism if we won. However, we lost, so I'm going to give you the racism that was always there.
But how many weeks? It would be. I think if England had won, it would have been the same as like what we've spoken about on this series as well. Like when the Black Lives Matter uprising started last June, like every day we were saying to each other, "Do Black Lives still matter? Do Black Lives still matter?" And they did, and then one day they didn't. Do you know what I mean? So it was like, I think that what would happen to football. But it's interesting you just said about context here, because what I was thinking is how context helps the right. And what I mean by that is the way they are able to separate Capitol Hill from what happened after the football.
Yeah.
As in two separate things.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's
everything is a moment, everything. I mean, we're guilty of doing this on the show. Everything is a moment, everything is an incident, but it's all related, isn't it?
Yeah, and look, I mean, I think that you have some continuities. You have things that occur that enable others.
Yeah, that's what I mean. I think that's what I mean. Things that occur that enable others.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder, and I don't like to. Yeah, I guess I don't like to speculate, but I also worry sometimes, and this is something I was very conscious of when I was coming here, about the idea of like, what happens and what am I going to say? What do I say about it? Because I don't want every terrible thing to be an opportunity to go, well, I have a theory. And I think there's too much of that. There felt like there was such a long development of mainstreaming racism in the far right and such a level of acceptability that when that match ended, I mean, I know how I felt. I know how I felt what was coming or what I thought was coming. And I mean, it just felt like, and I wonder, because I know people on the sharp end of that have expressed how they felt at that moment and then what they experienced. And if you think about the way in which that context fuels racists, that actually, for me, it felt like some kind of angry celebration. It was I mean, I don't want to project sort of feelings on that.
No, I hear what you're saying.
But like, if they won, they got their nationalism.
If they won, they got the nationalism. If they lose, they get their racism.
Absolutely. That's how I felt. And not to say the nationalism didn't come with racism.
No, it is. And like, I think it's really interesting what you said about being nervous about coming on the show and not wanting to give any grand theory. I don't think we give any grand theory, or like, this is why we need, for these times of multiple crises, like dialogical knowledge production, we need we need conversation like this to sort of, do you know what I mean? So I don't think, I would hope that listeners don't ever think we think we.
Oh no, I didn't mean it about the show. I meant it about me.
No, I know you didn't. But it's interesting that, like, as academics, we feel like we need to, when we're saying something, it has to be something profound or something that is gonna. That people can then pick apart and then be like, oh, what's wrong with that theory?
Just things you sit at home thinking about. But I also felt this after like in the wake of George Floyd's murder and the protests. I mean, what did I feel? I had just written a book about racism in the far right. I'm a criminologist, and I really didn't feel like now was the time for my voice. It was time for my solidarity and allyship, and I think I felt a bit quiet at that moment because I think it was a different moment. Yeah,
we were traumatized. Fully. Like, we just couldn't speak. I just couldn't speak.
But I think now, I think people are trying to work out what this all means now. Given that there's a kind of forensic, in air quotes, analysis of what happened on January the 6th in Congress, given what happened after football, people are trying to make sense of what's all this that's happened. So the reaction to it, but also what's gone before. So there's a sense that people want to explain away what's happening.
On January 6th, so obviously Tissot means he's been talking about this stuff for years now. January 6th, I couldn't get hold of him. You were asleep, weren't you? And I was like, Tissot, where are you? Where are you?
I didn't think that was going to be followed by he was asleep.
The thing that's happening that you said was going to happen is happening. And I remember thinking, I need to go on Aaron's Twitter to see what Aaron's saying. I don't think you had said anything yet.
I didn't.
You didn't say anything. And I was like, I need to know what's happening.
Look, can I just say something? Like, you say about things are happening and now we're trying to figure out what's going on. I have slightly the opposite reaction. I'm like, we're on a bullet train here.
Yeah, we are, fully.
And look, I hate to say it, but like, I'm thinking about Snowpiercer. Like, it's going really fast. The apocalypse is occurring outside, and we're trying to get to the front. And we're going to get a lot revealed when we get to the front. So don't stop in this carriage and have an analysis. But yeah, I was deadly quiet.
Yeah, I was like, what's Aaron and Aurelien saying? What are they saying?
I was quiet. I wrote a 4,000 word blog piece that I've never published.
Oh, what? Can you publish it?
Because I just felt that everyone was coming out with their 2 cents. Like, it was like hot takes. And I figure, like, I may use it at some of the ideas at some point, but... In fact, one of the things some of the stuff I was saying about policing in that, I think my view after the testimony the past couple of days, particularly from black police officers, changes what I say. I think there's more interesting and nuanced things to say about that. Got in quite a few arguments a couple of days before because a lot of academics were posting these things like, fascism is on the rise. There's going to be like a disaster if Trump loses. I knew there was going to be a reaction, but I firmly believed that you don't fuel that kind of speculation, particularly when people who are often at the sharp end of that still have to go to the voting booth. I thought it was really important. And you know what? I mean, people wrote things about fascism, takeover, all this kind of stuff. They may claim they were right, but I still claim that it was wrong to do it. Mm-hmm. I don't think maybe some people are speculative kind of theorists, but I think we have to be very careful what we put out there. And I've become increasingly concerned about this in the same ways like we were talking about Twitter before. Mm-hmm. I'm questioning the idea of having all these gotcha moments because some reactionary bro kind of like says something racist again.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, 100%. And I do think that there's a certain, it's like, okay, yeah, this is like some liberal centrist that's saying something which is offensive. Like, yeah, we know. Like, do you know what I mean? The gotchas in the quotations are getting a bit tired now. I get it because you want to see people that have got large platforms sort of speaking out against this stuff. But equally, like, what is this leading to?
For me, they're just words. We navigate around them. I don't really pay them attention anymore. Like I would want some more substantive issues to be taken care of. Like we know what the issues are, right? If someone's saying something racist again, like so all the stuff in football, the outpouring at the football, that's not what I got upset over. It was the kind of liberal acceptance, like they're shocked, like shit. That's what upset me. Not the person being racist.
But do you think that's why, like, GB News is failing? Because me and T, me and T had a bit of a debate about this. I said it would fail.
Yeah, Chantel was right on this one, man.
And T said, no, they're in it.
I thought the moment was right for all the kind of right-wing crazy people I'd see on YouTube, all the comments, this is like their thing. This is like a whole channel dedicated to them.
And then they had the money, and to be fair on you, they got all the money.
And they had the mainstream platform on Sky, on Freeview. I was thinking they've got it sewn up.
They have that like historical 70s TV look.
Yeah. But I was saying to see, the money is just not enough. The money isn't enough, and all those things weren't enough. And I guess it comes back to the arguments made in the book, Aaron, that actually like it's so mainstream now. Yeah. Like it's almost not needed. It's almost not needed.
Yeah, it's interesting because I know this is slightly. You mentioned the football, and it just got me thinking about how Spike tried to make that racism about the working class, and it didn't. It didn't cut it.
No,
because everyone knows it's middle class elites like
that go to the football. The tickets to the final cost like between £500 and £1,000. Like
but also no one thinks racism is just exclusive anymore. That myth is burst.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean,
that's true.
And I say the reason I raised that was partly a response to what you said, Tissot, but also the fact that this segues into the GB News was like, I mean, you can't. I mean, these guys constructed this idea that we have nowhere else to speak. Oh my! You know, like we're lost. We're going to have to start our own multi-million-pound platform, and you know what? We're going to get support and airtime from every right-wing newspaper. I mean, just call bullshit on it.
I love that. We've got nowhere else to go. I think it was, what's his name? Nigel Bigger. Yeah. He was on it the other day, like, talking about being cancelled. And it's like, the professor of, like, a most elite institution in the world is talking about being cancelled.
It's nonsense. And I think you combine that with the fact that, like, GB News is making an argument as if they're in the cancelled margins or the soon-to-be cancelled margins. And there's other narratives which are dodgy as anything, but kind of make sense to people. This doesn't work as much anymore, but I think you have another two things going on. One is it's just crap. I mean, it's really badly done.
But then T made a really good argument. T made a really good argument that was part of their branding, like because there's loads of spelling mistakes on the things and stuff,
so
and like I was like, what?
To give the idea that they are like a DIY blogger. So it's similar to... You
think so?
Because they done it... So if you went to their YouTube channel, they've done lots of clips, snippets, and it was presented in a similar fashion to what you would see a DIY political commentator on YouTube. Yeah. So it was very effective. So when you saw it on your phone, on your small screen, it didn't look too dissimilar to those platforms, even though there's millions, multi-millions behind it.
Yeah, but I also think... And I think this is the argument I'm more convinced by, or the analysis I'm more convinced by, is that actually the power the ability to mainstream racism reaction in the far right was always something that was enabled by the liberal media, liberal mainstream press. Why, when they had won that, they had succeeded? That was the business model that was winning. Why would you leave all that and go, we're going to have a scrappy multi-million pound upstart? I mean, you're rejecting the liberal mainstream, which I know that's always been part of the narrative, but they were on it while doing it. Mm-hmm. And they were getting the airtime. I don't know that the audience, I don't know what audience they want. Do they want everyone to abandon like the mainstream liberal, centrist, center-right media? Mm-hmm. Let's not say the center-right, but they were winning the argument on their own terms there. Maybe that had something to do with its success. And I think that's partly what we argue in the book. Because you've already got the scrappy upstarts on YouTube and on various social media outlets and platforms. You've got Spiked, you've got this, you've got that. Why was something else needed unless you're trying to compete with, the BBC?
I think what makes GB News not work was they tried to carve out a niche similar to Fox has carved out in the States. Yeah. Which doesn't work in the UK context, right? But they saw how effective Fox is and how Fox has generated copycats. So I think GB News saw Fox and the success that they have and how they've galvanized a whole group of people that will follow them cult-like.
But those people, I guess, coming back to Aaron's argument, I don't disagree with what you're saying, T, but basically that has already been done.
It's also not just context. It's also they come about going, well, how many decades down the line? Well, let's try it, right? Like the times have moved on. The way you develop and filter and ferment kind of reaction has changed, partly under the influence of Fox, not just in America. I mean, again, with the circulation of white victim narratives or conspiracy theories or ideas about the liberal elite. Which they could have piggybacked Fox. They didn't need to start their own Fox, how many decades down the line. I think the model didn't work, not just because it's not America, but actually they're trying to do something that was part of a particular historical juncture and set of conditions and trying to do it again. But the culture wars are on. You don't need to start the culture wars on a new channel.
Yeah, that's a good way of saying it.
It's good. It's that we're in it.
Yeah, we're in it.
We're in it. And you will win it. You're winning. You're winning. You're winning. You're winning on the BBC. You're winning on ITV. You're winning on Sky News.
Absolutely. And again, what you're saying is that they start this. You've still got all the mainstream liberal centrist media mocking them, but giving them a airtime and embracing all the government's policies in terms of COVID. It's not as if reaction needs a new outlet.
Yeah.
And I do think that their aesthetic, and as you said, they're kind of the does probably try to construct themselves an upstart, but you can't, it doesn't, I'm not sure it works this late in the game.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah. That does make sense.
I could be wrong, but that's my feeling. Because as we stand, we still have the centrist liberal media justifying a lot of policies, practices. We see from me and Aurelien's earlier work, liberal Islamophobia is charging through the courts of justice.
It's on the rise. It's on the rise massively. On that note, listeners, you know, it is always good when Aaron comes on, but you know you're not necessarily going to get the hope. You're not necessarily going. Although, can we just do one finish, George? Can we just do one
for the hope?
Yeah, can we do one hope?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where are we seeing some solidarities forming? Do you feel?
No, sorry.
Right, that's a wrap.
No, I think it happens because of discussions like this.
Yeah.
I think that the hope is in, I think I said this earlier, as difficult as it was to say the things we were saying, to have the book out at that time, to kind of experience and witness what's been going on, the fact that we belong to a community that is talking back, that is exposing and revealing these kind of narratives, discourses, policies, and practices is really important. It's important to protest it. And I think that the government knows that. And I think that's why the crackdown on protests. We have to stand up to it. We have to call it. But we also have to stop calling out each other on every little thing and parsing every statement and not perform the divide and rule or enable the divide and rule that they want, that they feed off of. I mean, you can have on the reactionary side, you can have like religious conservative Christians, white supremacists, religious Jewish people. You can have, former Muslims who turn against. You can have libertarians. They can come together because they have, despite their differences. And I'm not saying we need to be like them, but I think we need to show kindness and solidarity with each other, and we need to fight it as united a front as possible. And that doesn't mean giving up the arguments. This isn't the old days of saying, we'll let this guy lead and we'll call, our identities reified. It's not that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think, I have a lot of hope from discussions like this, from the books I'm reading, from the podcasts I'm hearing, from the people I'm meeting and working with. And I think that's really important because I don't think this is forever. And I do think that the last thing really important is we can't have false hope in centrists and liberals that they're going to simultaneously fight systemic racism while increasing the security and policing state. Mm-hmm. Because that's not what's going to happen.
And this is the big question, the big issue up against in pandemic times, isn't it?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Aaron, thank you so much for that.
Smacked it.
So sick.
Smacked it. Come off Twitter. Let's all talk. Let's come off social media.
Let's all talk. Let's all talk.
I'm going to check it right after I go.
Yes. Listeners, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for listening to the T's and C's with Tisa and Chantel. You can now continue the conversation with us on Twitter and Instagram.